How are you feeling?
A lot better. We're almost there. I'm just tired still, but I'm better.
Good. So glad.
And according to the CDC, I can be around people as long as I'm masked. So that's good news.
You might just be tired because of children.
I'm always kind of tired. But this is like on Sunday after all the tourist stuff and everything, I went home at like 4:00 on Sunday, and I got in bed under the covers and went to sleep, which is unusual for me. But we're all making our way back. But thank you all for your concern. I am doing a-okay. How's everyone here? Anyone else been in COVID jail lately, or just me?
Aaron got sick, but he didn't have COVID this time, so
that's good.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to see you. Sam, what's going on? I saw a hand up.
Yeah, Rabbi Plotkin got to me last week about the 5 things to pass on.
In a good way.
I came up with 3 though. It's going to take a while to get the other 2.
Well, let us know when you've got it. So I've got the idea that I emailed Cantor and Rabbi Khan about right after we got off, as I said, this year for Slichot, I want us to do a workshop where we put together our kind of 5 lessons, and then our Yom Kippur study session, we can do kind of a community sharing. Won't that be nice? So you can start working on it now. Now you've got a sneak peek of what we're going to do for the High Holy Days this year. All right. Well, before we jump in, any other reflections on Rabbi Presant's presentation? Anything that surprised you? Anything that didn't surprise you? Anything you wanted to process before we talk about a new model for the rabbinate?
Rabbi, I just was really pleased to meet her, but I was sort of amazed that she was so down to earth in a way. I had her,
on a pedestal, huh?
I did. And it was really interesting to hear, and I have mixed feelings about it, but it was her decision that she really, it was either marriage or children or the rabbinate. She didn't feel like she could do both. And I had a lot of mixed feelings on that.
How did you feel about that, Rabbi? That's a good point. How did you feel about that?
It's interesting to me. First of all, just the difference between her and Cantor Ostfeld. That few years really made a difference in terms of what people were prepared for. She's a very different person with a very different story. There's a part of me where I hurt for her if that's something that she wanted, that she sacrificed.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody who wants to have a family and then isn't able to or doesn't, and it's anytime we sacrifice something, it's painful. So if that was her experience, then I can see how painful it is. And I also feel tremendous gratitude, because I think that a rabbi like me could never have existed without a rabbi like her. And somebody had to be the nachshon, the brave person to do it first. And so I'm just grateful.
Isn't it like the priesthood? I mean, it's like a Catholic priest. No children, no family. How can you really know to counsel families? I mean, I just don't think you can unless you have a family, but that's me.
Yeah.
That Catholic priest thing isn't working out real well anymore. No, it's not.
I was talking to my dad about it a little bit afterwards, who knows Sally from just the kind of the professional world. And he said, I'm going to turn off the recording for a second. Hold on. Great. Any other thoughts before we jump into something new?
I was looking for that book about Regina Jonas. I put it in the chat. If anybody has it and they're willing to lend it to me, I'd really like to borrow it.
Thank you. Someone sent me a link and said it was like $150.
I did. I looked it up on Amazon. It was $164 on Amazon. So I don't know that many people are going to buy it, Lori.
I found it on Abe's Books. I think it was like $85, but even that seemed a little pricey for me. So I'm going to look around before I make the purchase, but
Laurie,
if I do
Laurie,
purchase it, I'll share it.
you might check with Carol Reynolds just on the chance that it's in the CBI library.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. Thank you.
If not, I will.
Oh, okay.
If not, if it isn't, I don't know. I haven't looked. I didn't think of that. That was a great suggestion. I'm doubtful, but let's see. If it isn't, I will purchase it, and we can make a little lending library list, and anyone who wants to read it can borrow it. And I'll get it for all of us.
Would it be in the public library?
Unlikely, but you never know.
I just checked on the Phoenix Public Library and I didn't find a match.
I tried myself, so if it's purchased, I'd like to be on the list too.
I mean, it's a pretty niche interest.
Well, I think it's got her thesis in it, right? Or it has some excerpt about that paper that she wrote, Can Women Serve as Rabbis? So I think that's in there. So
yeah, I'd love to have it in my library. So if we don't find it, I will purchase it for all of us to share.
I could do a plug for you and say that if we all made a small donation to your discretionary fund, you could really offset the cost of that book.
Oh, you know what? I had a recent donation. Thank you, anonymous donor. It's on you. So thanks. All right. Well, here is what I would love to share with you today. This was really fun to prepare because I'll have to share my cute little intro slide. So this is what I'm sharing with you today is essentially a version of my rabbinic thesis that I'm going to tell you the story of how it came to be today. But how often do we really get a chance to share this kind of stuff when we work on it? You know, you spend a year of your life really dedicated to it, and then when do we ever actually talk about it? So I'm really excited to share it with you today. It does relate to a lot of what Sally was saying last week. One other piece of it that I want to tell you that's so cool is that this book, which we'll look at more in a few minutes, it's called The Sacred Calling. It was published about 10-ish years ago, and it's dedicated to 4 decades of women in the Rabbinate. And it's basically everything that we've been talking about for the last few weeks, but in a 700-page volume. And a short version of my thesis is in this book. So your rabbi is a published author. I'm one very, very, very small piece of this incredibly dense volume. But what I'm sharing with you all today is really the gist of it and how it came to be, and what I learned and what I've learned since that has really changed. But I think it's a nice little end cap to this study that we've been doing. So before we talk about my thesis, let's go back to our first time that we spoke together about what a rabbi is, who a rabbi is, what a rabbi looks like. So what we talked about, that first list that we made, is that a rabbi is a good teacher, a rabbi has compassion, a rabbi is a good listener, very understanding, ability to speak or share or sing publicly, potentially even in harmony. By the way, I always take the melody and just let Cantor do whatever he's going to do. Knowledge of Judaism and belief, leadership abilities, a role model, a good student / ongoing student, and having the right degree. So it's a long list. And I think that if we spent more time, and now after the last few weeks, we could probably even add more to it. But what I'd like each of you to do is picture in your mind the first person you think of, the first person who held that role of rabbi for you, not the first person you think of, because you're looking at me and that's going to mess up my my whole hypothesis here. The first rabbi that you knew, and who fills that image for you?
Oh, clearly the guy in the upper left, or yeah, for me.
The guy in the upper Rabbi Plotkin.
Okay, yes.
He's not tall enough though.
Oh, I don't know his height.
So apparently
He knows what I'm meaning.
I'm the shortest rabbi at CBI since Rabbi Plotkin. So this here is Rabbi Plotkin. He is, anyone here have rabbi? Is this the person who came to mind for you as the Nancy? When you think of Rabbi Plotkin, what comes to mind for you? Oh, you're on mute.
Well, short, because I was almost his height when I was like 9 years old. But I loved his sermons. He was so energetic and he changed his voice constantly. And even though he was almost my height, I still looked up to him.
This is something I so often hear about Rabbi Plotkin, that though he was small in stature, he was a big presence.
Yes.
Carol?
But he was a basketball player, even though he was short. He used to play basketball at the YMCA downtown with my husband every week. So he was short in stature, but he played a good game. But my rabbi, Rabbi Erwin Hyman in Syracuse, New York, at Temple Adath Yeshurun, he to me was my role model of a rabbi before I knew Rabbi Plotkin. But I don't know that all these pieces fit with him, because I think a lot of the older rabbis didn't always have all of these characteristics.
Interesting.
They didn't sing. I don't know. Mine didn't sing. They were a different older school. They weren't the kind of rabbis we see today. Even though we had a family and children and the whole 9 yards, I just don't think they had the same. Of course, he wasn't Reform either, but I don't know. It wasn't the same as it is today.
Felice?
My rabbi that I thought of first is somebody you might know, Alan Bennett, Rabbi Bennett, very active in San Francisco, very active in social issues, went up to Sacramento a lot and worked a lot of good issues for Jewish values. And he also didn't have necessarily these things, but he came in with a lot of intelligence and passion, maybe not compassion, but passion on issues. And he was gay and very much out with that. So maybe a little, and he certainly couldn't sing, but I don't know if you ever met Alan Bennett, but he's JCRC, very active. So,
but definitely a larger than life persona.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, we're gonna hear from Susan, Sam, and Natalie, and then we're gonna keep going. Susan, go ahead.
My experience was very similar to Carol's in that I grew up in a conservative synagogue, and I cannot think of any personal connection to the rabbi, even though this is the rabbi who married Mark and me. I don't remember him ever attending anything with the Sunday school. He simply conducted services. It was he was clearly a man of authority, but I can't attribute any personal connection or any personal characteristics that make him other than almost I hate to use the word cardboard figure, but I don't have any emotion about him at all. And it might have been a function of being in a more formalistic environment, because it was a conservative synagogue. Women were not terribly participatory at all. So maybe he was a creature of the environment, but I can't attribute any real personal characteristics to my first rabbi.
Yeah.
Kind of sad.
Interesting. And I think worth noting that your experience is probably not unique, and that there may be a reason for that. And we're going to get into that today. Sam, go ahead.
I think my first concept of the rabbi was he was kind of modern Orthodox back for the 40s and 50s. You know, if somebody like that, there was no mixed seating or anything like that. He was Orthodox. You know, we had the women sat in a balcony, and it was pretty well attended on Saturday mornings. But he was involved in every aspect of the temple. I don't remember him ever taking a sabbatical. He might have taken a vacation, but he was there forever. And when he left, when he finally retired, the ones that came in after him made it strictly Orthodox. They would ask somebody if they were Shomer Shabbos before calling them to the Torah.
So there's kind of a sense that rabbi that you grew up with really did Judaism right.
I think so. You know, I never heard him sing, so where guitar, forget about it. In those days, nobody Orthodox and the guitar were, verboten.
Yeah.
Still there.
But he was considered the chief rabbi of Passaic, New Jersey. We had like small city, but we had like 7 synagogues at least. He kind of like inspired me to want to be a rabbi at one point.
Ooh, so inspiring, really kind of full-time, all the time, 24/7 devotion to Jewish life.
And his wife was also very, very involved in the synagogue.
Yeah.
We called her by her first name, but she was there. Even after I moved to Arizona, she called me after my daughter died. So.
Yeah, lifetime commitment. Natalie, go ahead.
Yeah. So I grew up on the south side of Chicago in a classically reformed congregation. So I guess I'm the oddity around here. Anyway, Aaron Ofer was the rabbi, and believe me, he was the rabbi. I thought he was 8'6". He had big bushy eyebrows and a booming voice. And I do think the whole use of voice was very much during that period of time. I'm reading a book called The Provincials. It's not a new book. It's originally from the 70s, about the Jews of the South and how they characterized what they hired in rabbis who stayed 50 years. They didn't move a lot. They were hired basically because they fit into the Gentile community. It's quite an interesting read. And then, of course, if you look at the role of the rabbi today and the role of the rabbi back then in the South, but not necessarily in the North. So I think there was a geographic component to everybody's rabbis at the time.
Possibly. And that image, that classical reform image of the classical reform lasted longer in the South than it did. So I think that there's a few things that we see in common. First of all of the rabbis that you grew up with, kind of by the course of time and how time works, were all men. Often this kind of larger than life persona, this booming voice that seems to represent authority and kind of the true word of Judaism. For me too, I grew up with a certain image of a rabbi. You all recognize this guy from Torah study? This is my dad. So when you grow up and your dad is your rabbi, you only ever have one rabbi. Even when you move from Buffalo to Chicago, it always looked the same for me. So a rabbi always looked like my dad. Now, luckily, I look a lot like my dad, but I'm missing the beard and the hairline. Now, if you Google rabbi and do an image search, you get a lot of people who look like this. It's not until about 20 icons down that you get anybody who looks anything like me. So let's keep this in mind. There is a book that I was assigned to read in rabbinical school. This is the book. I was assigned to read it in my pastoral care class. It's called The Rabbi as a Symbolic Exemplar by Rabbi Jack H. Bloom. This is Jack Bloom. He actually died within days of my article being published in this book. And I'm trying not to make any correlation there because that's terrible. But so he wrote this book, the idea being that the rabbi is a symbolic exemplar. The rabbi is a symbol. And the key idea here is that being a rabbi means being a symbolic exemplar who stands for something other than oneself. So what are some of the things that you surmise Jack H. Bloom assumes the rabbi stands for?
Can you rephrase that question?
What is the rabbi a symbol of? What do you assume? Like, what's your guess, having not read the book? Nancy.
From his definition, the rabbi is an actor.
Okay, so that's kind of another way of reading the rabbi as a symbol. Good. Okay.
And he's something other than oneself. So he's not being himself as a rabbi.
So the rabbi is something other than himself. Oops,
yeah.
Someone in the waiting room. Nancy, what else?
He's part of the community.
Part of the community?
Yeah.
What does he symbolize to the community?
Not only the rabbinic part, but a leader in the community.
So the rabbi is kind of symbolizing leadership of the Jewish community. Good. What else, Susan? Oh, sorry.
Knowledge.
The rabbi symbolizes knowledge, like knowing all the stuff about Judaism mostly, right? Good. Felice? You're on mute. Oh, sorry. I think I remuted you after you muted. There you go.
Hey, comforting is something that comes to mind, but I have a rather, another, what about fundraising? In small synagogues, the rabbi is supposed to be bringing in new members.
Mhm.
And we don't have a lot of staff doing that. And it's very hard sometimes. In my little Temple Israel in Alameda, California, we really were dependent on our rabbi to be out there and doing a little proselytizing for Temple Israel.
So in that way, the rabbi symbolizes the synagogue, right? The rabbi represents the synagogue, and the rabbi kind of stands for the and so if the synagogue succeeds, that's on the rabbi. If the synagogue is failing, that's on the rabbi. So that's one correlation we can make, that the rabbi symbolizes the synagogue as a whole. What else, Chloe and Ben?
I was just gonna say, this may be too broad, but I would say outside of the Jewish community, a rabbi would probably symbolize the Jewish person, the Jewish peoplehood.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That, often, when we get put on a panel as a token Jew, we speak for Judaism. Good. Lori, what else?
Well, definitely holiness of home, holiness of self, a person being morally responsible, humanly responsible, just a stand-up person who dedicates their lives to bringing other people closer to God.
So that's a big job, right? This sense that the rabbi symbolizes the holy way of doing things, the most authentically Jewish way of doing things. Who was it that was talking about the big booming voice?
A labor of love.
So when you imagine the rabbi with the big booming voice, for some people, we may connect that big booming voice with kind of a representation of God, that there is this correlation between who the rabbi is and what a Jew is supposed to be, how we connect with God, like this intermediary, right? When we imagine that rabbi up on the bima, right? And now I'm not saying that that's indicative of every rabbi today, but a common perception. So I want to read to you a little bit from the rabbi as a symbolic exemplar here. Okay, is it small for you? I'll read it because it might be hard to see. So I'm painting the scene for you. I'm sitting in a class, it's probably my 3rd or 4th year of rabbinical school. And we've been given this book to read as like, get ready guys, because this is what's coming, okay? And keeping in mind that I am reading this as a rabbi's kid. So I grew up in this lifestyle in a different way than most people. Those who have knowingly or unknowingly volunteered to be symbolic exemplars must, from their first days at rabbinical school, be taught the inevitability of their symbolic exemplarhood. They must be provided with this information so that the existence and consequences of their symbolic exemplarhood will be no surprise when they enter congregational life. They must be taught that symbolic exemplarhood goes with them in all their rabbinic functioning and is a tool to be used in the service of the people they are a part of and apart from. They need to know that symbolic exemplarhood grows with each bar mitzvah, each wedding, each funeral, each public experience as a rabbi. That with each of these, another imperceptible layer is added to their symbolic exemplarhood. They need to know that they are never talking only for themselves, that despite what they think or hope, they are experienced as talking for God, for Torah, or for the people Israel. They are expected to be special and different and to act that way. They must further learn that the conflict between their loyalty to their own family and their being members symbolically of the congregational family is a conflict that comes with the territory. It is useless to complain about it or wish it away. Our young rabbis need to realize that rabbis do not belong to their congregations, no matter how long their tenure. Being on symbolically all the time separates them from their congregations. It goes on to say things like, when you run into people in the grocery store, they're going to look in your cart and see what you're buying. When you offend them, you are turning, you are impacting their entire experience with Judaism. That if they are to see you doing anything that is out of character for what a rabbi ought to be, you are jeopardizing a person's relationship with Judaism and God and spirituality as a whole. So initial thoughts, responses, does this feel accurate to you? How does this strike you? Sam, go ahead.
This could also describe a teacher.
Yeah.
The teacher is always on when he's in a classroom. A teacher is never part of the class. He's separate from the class. And when you see, when you see these people outside, you're wondering what they think of you. If you're teaching in a religious school, for instance, a conservative, and you have ham in your cart, you wonder, you might think, not that I would ever do something like that, but again, you're always on. You're always different than the parents that you're with, and you're different than the students that you're with.
Okay, so some of that separation it makes sense. It fits. That being separate from fits in some ways because you are playing a different role. Okay, Susan, Sandro, I'm just going down my line on top here.
Yeah, I think this is very unfair, but it's very true. And I know that probably all of us have an example. One of my favorite examples is a rabbi who was with Congregation Beth Israel, who told me that when I'll use he generically, went on vacation, he had to come up with different descriptors as to what he did. Because when you meet people, one of the first things they say is, well, what do you do? Where are you from? And what do you do? And he again, generically said, I never say that I'm a rabbi. And his descriptors were anything from I do landscaping to I do counseling and, a variety of things. So I think that it's unfortunate, but yes, I think rabbis, teachers, I agree with Sam, people, police officers are, maybe even politicians, are considered to be examples, and fair or unfair, what they do is magnified and has great impact.
Mm-hmm. I'm always a kindergarten teacher on airplanes. Susie Sachs, go ahead.
Well, after hearing you read that, I was going to say, what else did he have to write in the book? That like summed up whatever the book was about. My only other comment is, first I was confused by the comment, young rabbis they don't belong to their congregations, being on symbolically. And I guess it means that you belong to much more than your congregation. I think
it means that you don't belong like a member belongs.
Okay.
You belong you belong to your congregation.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would never think of it that way. And I just want to say real quickly that the rabbi I always think of is Marty Weiner, who was the rabbi at Beth Israel, and an amazing rabbi.
Lori, go ahead.
So what you were saying about the big voice, I don't know how you described it, but I think what you were maybe talking about was what we read about in Exodus in chapter 7, where it says, and the Lord said unto Moses, see, I have set thee in God's stead to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. And so that basically makes Moses, he's going to be the one to give the message as a direct, representative of God, right? So, that's probably where that comes from, that, when people experience that in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely understood that. But I mean, if we're really living our lives Jewishly, direct eretz, did I say that right?
Derek Eretz, yeah, good.
Derek Eretz, okay, so I mean, we should always all be on. We should narrow the gap between our conviction and our conduct, right? We should always be trying to live a good life and to do the right things. And so we should always try to be on, even if we're not, you know, a rabbi or a symbolic exemplar. I mean, it's still important, but I definitely understand how when much is given, much is expected, right? So you're given the title of rabbi, much is expected.
So Lori, I think I agree with you, and I swear you're not a plant. I'm not paying you to be here. But when I read this for the first time, and I think especially as a rabbi's kid, because, you know, you can say all of this about the rabbi, but also I've seen what happens, you know, when you drink all the rabbi's orange juice, or when, let's see, you know, when you're on vacation and playing in the swimming pool with the rabbi, or when you know, when you see the rabbi in all of his most human circumstances. And growing up in a small community, that rabbi is also your rabbi. So I grew up with this different perception of what a rabbi is, because I knew the rabbi more intimately than almost anybody in the congregation, because he was my dad. And so this idea of the rabbi symbolizing God, the idea of the rabbi symbolizing all of Judaism didn't sit well for me. And in reading this, while I think that there is a lot of truth, and probably I think there's more truth to it than I would have admitted when I first wrote my thesis, now almost 15 years ago. I don't know, less than 10 years ago. I really felt like it was my duty to challenge this idea that the rabbi was anything more than human, because I had only ever experienced a rabbi as being completely human. And in stepping into this role, the last thing I wanted to do was to become a rabbi who was anything other than human. But I didn't know what that looked like or what that meant until I stumbled upon an old theory. So Carol Gilligan is a psychologist and a writer and feminist theory thinker writer. So this book, in a different voice, I happened upon in a completely different context than the work I was doing in school. Audrey, I see you nodding. You know Gilligan's work. Anyone else familiar?
I'm on a Zoom call.
Hold on.
Okay.
So the central idea here, and now granted, when I first come upon this, I'm late to the party, right? You know, I'm reading about this in the 2000s, not in the 1980s. But it's this idea that the way that women and men approach morals and ethics is different because of our relationship to our caregivers. Now, those of you who you know were raised in this movement can probably add more detail to it than I can. Audrey, I'm looking at you because I see you smiling and nodding, and I'm assuming you read Carol Gilligan long before I ever did. But that because women are raised in connection with their caregivers, because most of our caregivers are women, we kind of are come to our ethic through care and connection, whereas men are more of this justice reasoning, in the sense that everybody has their individual rights, everybody has a set system of justice, and are also separate from their caregivers. So the idea that when we are in relationship with others, men fall more into a structure of hierarchy, whereas women see more of circles of care. This idea that we are in relationship with our decision making, rather than seeing a system of hierarchy of decision making. So the classic example is someone needs medication for their wife, but they can't get it. It's too expensive. It's impossible to get, based on is it okay to break in and steal the medication? And men will approach that from a theory of what's right and what's wrong, and is it okay to break in, whereas women will approach it from a system of relationship, like, okay, well, could we talk to the pharmacist? Could we, you know, the relationship with the wife is primary. So we don't need to get like deeply into Carol Gilligan, but what came to this for me, what was most important for me in reading this is it occurred to me that the system of separation was a male system. That this is kind of a male way of thinking about things, that there has to be a hierarchy and that there has to be a separation between the rabbi and the congregation. What does it look like if we reimagine synagogue life, if we reimagine the rabbinate through an ethic of care instead of an ethic of justice? What does it look like if we see the synagogue as a system of relationships and not a system of hierarchy? That's the kicker there that I wanted to think about. What does it look like if we are in relationship to one another instead of in hierarchy from one another? Now, if you look back at Jack H. Bloom, what year did he write and publish The Rabbi is a Symbolic Exemplar?
72, right?
What else happened in 1972?
Oh, was that 50 years ago? So that would be when the first woman rabbi was ordained.
Exactly. So when we're reading
in America, not including Regina Jones.
Exactly. Good. Oh, we've learned so much. So when we're reading about the rabbi as a symbolic exemplar, we are reading from a perspective that what he closed the book on the rabbi as a symbolic exemplar in 1972, before there were any women in the rabbinate. So as I'm reading Carol Gilligan, I'm reading about Sally Presant, I'm putting all of these pieces together, and I realize that the rabbi as a symbolic exemplar is a structure of the rabbinate that was written and envisioned and created and observed before there were any women in the rabbinate at all. And so what does it look like now? So I'm writing this now in 2010. Women are in the rabbinate now. Women can be rabbis, and it doesn't have to look the way that it always did. This introduction to a different voice and to Carol Gilligan made me realize that there are other ways of doing it, and nothing had been written about how to be a rabbi in a community since 1972. So there had to be another way of doing it. And this was kind of the basis for my rabbinic thesis, which was a feminist critique of the rabbi as a symbolic exemplar, and a kind of starting to talk about what it means to be a rabbi in a world where women can also be rabbis. So I'm going to stop share for a second. The process that I went through was I interviewed different rabbis of different generations of different size synagogues, and I asked them questions about their relationships. What I wanted to know was, do you feel like you have friends who are congregants? Do you feel like you can be open and vulnerable with congregants? Have you ever had a congregant care for you in a way? What are the boundaries that you have in your relationships with your congregants? I wanted to prove that since Jack H. Bloom wrote The Rabbi as a Symbolic Exemplar, the walls and the boundaries between rabbis and the people that we serve has become more porous and more open and less defined. That there's more opportunity now to build authentic relationships, because I kept coming back to that first point that Sam made, which is that if the rabbi is a symbol, then the rabbi is an actor, right? That it's not true and authentic relationship. And how can we build true and authentic relationships with Judaism if the rabbi isn't even being true and authentic? So to me, the whole idea of symbolic exemplarhood, of being a symbol for anything, didn't feel honest to me. It didn't feel authentic to me. And so this was kind of the beginning of my reshaping of re-articulating, I should say, of what I wanted the rabbinate to look like for me and what I believed it already was. All right, before I go on, questions, thoughts, ideas, concerns?
Are you going to share with what you shared? What are we going to get to? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm going to show you.
So you're not going to do What Was the Rabbi Thinking? I love that game.
I know I'm doing it a little bit right now, but
Okay.
or I was a minute ago. But just if you have any reflections before I get into that.
I think that maybe one of the survival modes I think a rabbi might have to take on is just to look at the congregation instead of as and if you have your own family, that the congregation would be your extended family. I mean, I don't know how else you would be able to do it.
You know, when I was sick last week, so Nancy offered to go to Trader Joe's for me. Audrey offered to drop off vegetable soup. You know, it did feel like the congregation was my extended family in that moment. And you know, I'm remembering when I was on bed rest and the Lubers brought me dinner, you know, it really did feel like a relationship that went in both ways. You know, not in every sense of the word, but in many ways it did feel like an extended family. Now, that's not to say that it isn't complicated. It is extremely complicated, especially when it comes to the business end, right? Because they do work for the synagogue, because rabbis do work for the synagogue, and because no matter what I think or feel, there are always going to be people who are, you know, making their own judgments, and people do look in my cart at Trader Joe's, you know, and so it is more complicated, I think, than I originally imagined it when I was writing my thesis. However, I still believe that there's something to be learned from taking ourselves down from on high. I think it gets really dangerous when the rabbi believes themselves to be on the pedestal, to be separate from, to be different from, to be symbolizing anything. I think that's when we get into some of those really complicated power dynamics. All right, Susie, and then Chloe and Ben, and then I'll share with you what I've got.
Well, I just want to say that table you showed up where caring was on the right side and then the sort of male values on the left, basically, that's very common about women want to facilitate, women want everybody to agree. They're very good in if you see a woman running a meeting versus men running meetings, it's that whole caring thing is everywhere.
You know, one of the things I hear about Torah study is that when Rabbi Kahn leads Torah study, he talks more. When I lead Torah study, it's more of a facilitation of conversation. And that's not a judgment on what's better or what's different, but I do think it's illustrative of different ways of teaching and making conversation that probably does stem somewhere from this theory. Chloe and Ben, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that it sounds, what you're talking about now sounds very much kind of a microcosm of Judaism, where you have these passed down traditions, and it's so easy to think of it as that's the way that it should be done, and that's the only way to do it, and you just accept the what's the word, the momentum, you know, just carries forth indefinitely. But that's never the case, and it's not automatic that anybody notices this isn't the natural way that this should be, that this should exist. That there just comes a time where it starts to be questioned, and it builds up. The discussion around it generates its own energy, and then a change happens. It takes it, maybe not the entire movement, but it starts a new direction within Judaism. And I think that's an amazing thing, because I never would have thought about that. The difference of, you know, you think there's just men rabbis. Well, now there's women. So what's the difference? But it's an entirely different animal sometimes. That's an amazing thing.
And I think it's also important to point out that, you know, at this point, Gilligan's theory is now, 40 years old. And since then, there's been a lot more written and a lot of criticism of her theory as well. And I think we understand gender differently now than we did 40 years ago. And so I think that there's definitely growth and development since then. And this idea of there being binary ways that women think and binary ways that men think, you know, all of that is changing and different now. I don't think that we can say anymore that this is how women think and this is how men think. But we can see that there was a time where that binary thinking was progressive and influences where we are now. And so I think that the big change that occurred 50 years ago when Rabbi Presant was ordained, what we're seeing now is the way that it has grown and developed and changed even since then. And now we're on the brink of another new change. So it's exactly right that this is how it works. All right, Natalie, and then I'll go back to the slide.
Okay, so I'm just going to put something on the table that's, I think, a little, it makes it more of a complex relationship. In a perfect world where rabbis and congregants are friends and bring each other soup, which I think people do as human beings, regardless of your state, your position in life. Where it becomes sticky is, when is your congregant a friend, and when is your congregant a leader in the community for which you are, for lack of a better term, an employee in the congregation, in the synagogue. And I think on one hand, it works beautifully as long as everybody is singing Kumbaya. When they're not, I think it becomes very blurred.
I think you are absolutely right. It is blurry and it is messy, and there is nothing. And I think that is why these black and white boundaries were drawn in the first place. It's because better than being messy, better that we should draw clear boundaries. And no, I think messy is good. I think it is
a woman, and a woman likes messy, and
Uh-huh.
a man, with all due respect to each, and a man likes, and then there are women that have those tendencies that like that too.
Yes, and listen, like, I'm also, as much as I am extroverted and like being around people, I'm also a private. And so it is, and part of that is probably because of the messiness of it. We all find our way to navigate through the messiness of it, but I believe it's important to be open to the messiness of it. Felice, go ahead, and then I keep saying we'll go back. Felice, go ahead. No? Oh, go.
Are we together? Can you hear me?
What? Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. No, when it was just said about an employee, I was not going to mention this, but we had a lot of trouble in our last synagogue, and the rabbi was kind of up, her contract was up, and there was some serious discussion about whether re-upping her on that. And this discussion of being an employee was a big deal, because she took that very serious. I mean, she didn't like that at all. She did not like being considered an employee, and even being called that was a total insult. And I just wanted to get, if anybody had any feelings about that, because you are like part of everybody's family. You've been to our house. You've been, you do special things that are great memories for us. So all of a sudden, that's not an employee. That's somebody that you really care about. And I could see why she'd get insulted by being called an employee, and yet, I guess on paper, she is. I mean, she's hired, she's on a contract, but anyway, when that word was mentioned, I had to jump in. It's very, that might be a whole other discussion.
It's not. I mean, it is part of the same discussion, and I think, and like we just said a minute ago, it's really messy. But I go back to what I said a minute ago. I think that messiness is important. I think where it does get really tricky is in contract negotiations and things like that, because it's part of it. How do you, okay, here's a great example. The terrible thing that happened last week in Colleyville, Texas, that rabbi who literally put his life on the line for his congregation. And then an article came out in the Forward a couple of days later about the status of his employment, and that he, it is, I don't know the details of the negotiation and what happened and who decided what, but that he is in placement right now, looking for a new job, maybe by his choice, but it doesn't really sound like it, that they can love him. And also there comes a time when it's time to make a change and move on. And there is nothing about it that's easy. And that's why sometimes we need to put the hat on to say, this is a conversation that we're having as employee, employer, and sometimes where you say, okay, now I can be your rabbi. And what I say to people when they say, can I call you Sarah? Usually what I say is, call me whatever feels right to you, but you can also call me Sarah now, and then call me rabbi another time if you need to call me rabbi then. You know, I might be Sarah when I come visit you at your house. But when I'm officiating at your father's funeral, you might need to call me rabbi, and that's okay too. That these are porous boundaries. All right, so I see that there's hands up, but I want to go on because now we're almost out of time and I didn't even get to the next part. All right. So there had to be another way to do it, right? So the first thing that I found was this article from like the early 2000s by Rabbi Chaim Herring, who I don't think is related to Chuck Herring, but I don't know that he isn't related to Chuck Herring. I have no idea. But he reconceptualized, so this comes back to that initial question, like the airplane thing. I propose a simple yet significant phrase to answer the rabbi, what is it that you do question. He writes, we are morei derech chaim, literally guides to a Jewish way of life. Every pastoral, educational, or administrative encounter with other human beings provides us with an opportunity to share some aspect of our Jewish wisdom at whatever point along their life's journey we meet them. Every encounter is also an opportunity to learn from others about their journeys, and in turn incorporate some of their wisdom into our own understanding of the Jewish experience. So I really loved and resonated with this idea that a rabbi is not a symbol of what Jewish life is supposed to be, but a rabbi is like a leader on a journey, like your camp counselor, like the tour guide. You know, the person who knows more than you do, maybe at this particular point, but is bringing you along for the ride. It's not the same kind of separation as someone who's, up already at the top of the mountain, and you can only imagine what it's like to be there, but someone who's bringing you along as well. The other important image that helped me was, back to the Carol Gilligan stuff, was Feminist Therapy. There is a whole section of therapy and psychology in which we take away the idea that the therapist is the expert on your life and going to tell you how to get there, and rather you imagine therapy as two people sitting across the table from one another, rather than one's lying on a couch and the other sitting up in a chair. You're sitting together and working together to problem solve. So it was these images of guidance and role models and teaching that felt more collaborative than a hierarchical system, that helped me to imagine what I needed my rabbinate to look like. Okay, you can see it again, right?
Yes.
Okay, so here's a little bit of my thesis from the article version that I wrote. Critics of the relational rabbinate argue that because of the multiple roles that a rabbi must occupy, it is impossible to enter into an authentically intimate relationship with congregants. They argue that because the rabbi is in the position to counsel and advise congregants, and also to schmooze at an oneg with them, or like we said, to negotiate a contract with them, it is in the rabbi's best interest to protect the way that she is separate from them. In other words, the rabbi has an on persona, whether it is on the bima or at the supermarket, and an off persona that is seen only in the home or with other rabbinic colleagues. Bloom's model asserts that the rabbi needs to maintain strict boundaries in order to protect the mystique and the authority of the position. If the rabbi is to enter into true relationship, not a hierarchical relationship, but one where rabbi and congregant can sit face to face and truly see one another as people, the rabbi would be needlessly exposed as human, and she would lose the kavod that is demanded by the position. In order to find satisfaction in a relational rabbinate, one must gently and thoughtfully introduce this new framework in which respect for the rabbinic position is enhanced by the way that the rabbi approaches her position with humanity and authenticity. In the relationship rabbinate, the rabbi is expected to be a guide and a role model, not a symbol. The relational rabbi can enable other Jews to be comfortable with their own Jewish lives as well. When rabbis are no longer pretending, this is back to you, Sam, pretending to be symbols of God and the ideal Jew, congregations can realize that they, like their rabbis, are able to realistically live authentic Jewish lives. Such authenticity allows the whole community to see that the ideal Jew does not have to be like God. The ideal Jew simply has to be oneself, already made in God's image, striving for meaning in a thoughtful and purposeful way.
Very good.
Can you go back to
you.
can you go to the first slide? I missed the last paragraph. Oh, thank you.
So then the other side of this is that if we do imagine that the rabbi symbolizes God, what a different God we come up with, right? God looks really different if God looks like me than if God looks like, you know, the rabbi of our childhood. So I think that it's a model that kind of goes both ways. It's a model that is messy and a model that is complicated. And a model that I don't think would be possible without the Rabbi Regina Jonas's and the Rabbi Sally Presant's and the Rabbi, you know, who are some of the other pioneering women, the Cantor Barbara Ostfelds of the world. You know, those of us who read Barbara's book and were sort of taken aback by just how gritty and raw it was, about her story being so imperfect and not what we would necessarily have expected when we picked up the book of the first woman cantor. What we do have there is a model of resilience and growth and recovery. And it's so very Jewish to see ourselves able to go down a path like that. That Judaism isn't about being perfect, but it's about growing. So by expanding the model of what a rabbi is, what a cantor is, it also expands what Judaism is. And I think gives us all a little more power over our own Jewish journey. And that feels important to me. But that's not to say that it isn't messy or complicated. Lori.
So I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, although that was all beautiful and I loved what you wrote. In my opinion, the way you grew up was a unique combination of blessing and complexity.
Yeah.
Like a blessing because you were able to be nurtured. You had a role model, you know, you probably regularly attended synagogue. And so you grew up with this great blessing. So, and it obviously had an impact on your future, but complex in the fact that your dad had to be a parent. And I'm sure sometimes you might have thought, oh, that's just so unfair, Dad. And so, you know, where we look to rabbis to be a pillar of fairness, right? So I feel like as an adult, have you been able to, my question is, as an adult, have you been able to differentiate the dad from the rabbi so that you can appreciate the messages and do they resonate with you? Are you able to look at him in that light and appreciate that?
So I think that one of the ways that I came to this, I think one of the things that was so off-putting to me about the rabbis as symbolic exemplar is that my dad's a special person. He is really he's very authentic in everything he says and does. Now, that's not to say that he's going to come into the synagogue and yell at people for where they put their shoes, right? Like he might at home. I get to see grumpy dad. You know, I see grumpy Steve in a way that his congregants did not see grumpy Steve. But I don't see it as there being two separate people. And I think that that's where it gets dangerous, is when you have, I think that there's definitely an on and off, because there's times that we're at work and times that we're not. But you can't be two different people. I can't be a different person at home than I am at work. I am not going to be a different person as a mom than I am as a rabbi. That doesn't mean that what I say and do when I'm in mom mode isn't going to be different than what I say and do when I'm in parent mode. Just like, you know, Susan, when you went to work as an attorney, you were in attorney mode, and that doesn't mean you always spoke to your children the way that you did when you were at work, because at work you have to be professional in a different way than you have to be at home. But it doesn't mean that you're a different person. So I don't think I symbolize God at home, and I don't think I symbolize God at work. I think I'm always just me doing my best in the role that I'm in. And I think that it's the same for my dad. I think that that's part of like it is for all of us. You know, that we maybe have ways that we act that are appropriate in different ways in different settings, but it doesn't make us different people. And I think the hardest part is that, you know, if I'm, I can't be a different Jew at work than I am at home. I'm not going to pretend to you that I'm more religious than I am. That to me, my Jewish life has to be authentic, and that has to be the same at work and at home. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, I guess what I was more concerned with was, were you able to, as you got older, to see your dad not as a different person, but as the rabbi he is? In other words, sometimes I'll go and I'll listen to a sermon and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I was just thinking about that. That's got to be like divinely inspired words, right? Because the message really resonated with me. And so I do see a little bit of that divinely inspired, like it to me, it resonates. And so I feel like those words are inspirational words. So I just wonder if you've ever been able to have that moment, seeing your dad in that light. And then to know that also, you know, you may be just human and you may be just a rabbi, but you may be offering those same kind of moments to people in your congregation, whether you realize it or not. Like the things that you write, you know, you get your thoughts, you get your inspiration, you know, they could be divinely inspired. So did you ever have a moment where you're like, oh, wow, I was just thinking about that and he just said that, you know, is that a coincidence? Or
interesting. So I think that I don't think I'm any more divinely inspired than you are. I think that we all have equal access to divine inspiration. And the way that we each use that is going to be different. So for me, it's in the work that I do, and for you, it's in the work that you do. And I do think that part of what's interesting about growing up with my dad as a rabbi is that he's always been my rabbi. So I think I've always seen him kind of in both ways, but maybe more human, more often or earlier. Our perceptions change as we get older. For our parents get wiser as we get older. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Any other sort of final thoughts or questions or ideas? I know we're over time, but this has been a really fun 4 weeks of delving into this stuff with all of you. The kind of class I've wanted to teach for a long time and never had the chance to do. I'm sorry, my brain's a little fuzzier than usual, but
not at all, not at all.
Any other thoughts before we say goodbye?
One quick personal thing. After other people are off, I want to talk to you about something.
Sure.
Real quick.
Sure, I'll do my best to symbolize God for you.
You won't have to.
Well, thank you all so much for going on this journey. This has been really fun. Love to talk with you more about any of this at any time, and I hope we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank
Kathy. I'll stay on.
Thank you.
Rabbi, did you get to see Nancy and Tripp this last week?
No, because we all had COVID.
Oh, okay, because I got to meet them last
how
week.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it was really kind of fun. I was over at Al's daughter's house.
So nice. Yes, we were supposed to see them, but we all had COVID and they didn't want to see us.
I can imagine they would not have wanted to.
Yeah.
How are you doing now?
I'm doing better. I'm still like my brain feels a little slow, but better.
Okay.
Better than I was for sure.
The whole family came down with it?
My husband didn't get it, but the baby brought it home from daycare and then generously shared with the rest of us.
Oh, that was very thoughtful.
Very sweet. Well, good to see you.
It's good seeing you too. I've got another question if you've got a few minutes. You know, somehow my feeling until recently was, you know, the rabbis are supposed to be these people who are, the prayers mean something so much different to them. How can I reach that understanding that it really deeply affects me? And then I guess it was last week, I guess when the talk was, Rabbi is a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher.
Mm.
I thought, yeah, it's that simple. You don't have to really be so love every minute that you're at temple, but you love the opportunity to share the values and the history and the ethics that Judaism provides.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you shared that. Yeah, I think it, you know, just having, you know, saying them more often and over, and, you know, you kind of reach a point of meaning with it. But
Yeah.
I agree with you that, you know, not every moment is going to be a deep spiritual moment, that there's plenty of other things to gain from the experience of being there.
Yeah.
And participating.
The other thing is, as when you're in rabbinic school, do you take classes in counseling?
We take a class on pastoral counseling and like a class on hospital chaplaincy.
Because boy, that is a huge responsibility.
Yes, and so our kind of rule of thumb is meet up to 3 times, and if the need is deeper than you can meet, then refer to a real counselor, because we're not that. We dabble a little, but definitely not real therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Well, continue getting better.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Oh, it's wonderful seeing you too. And I really appreciate your being with us.
Of course. It was fun seeing you.
Okay.
And we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.